What do you get when you combine a world-class EMS physician and medical director
I speak pretty good English for a guy from Detroit.
with an EMS veteran and all-around nice guy?
Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Oh, that's so good. Oh, my God.
Well, you get the EMS show. Taking it to the people, here's your host, Dr. Ritu and Mike Verkest.
Well, a very pleasant Tuesday evening, everybody. Mike Verkest, Dr. Ritu, and our special guest, Dr. Frank Guyette. How is everybody doing tonight? You guys good?
Yeah. Stoked.
This is awesome.
Hey, I like your shirt, Ritu.
That's a really nice shirt you have on, Mike.
Thanks. Why are you wearing an F1 jersey?
Why am I wearing an F1 jersey? That's a really good question. Because I'm going to Vegas. Going to Vegas.
Yes,
so
you
Vegas
are.
Starts in 2 days.
I'm so excited for you.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see. Maybe I'll see Rob Lawrence, associate marshal.
Well, you know he's going to be working.
I know.
On your right-hand side at turn 14.
Oh, I didn't hear you was at turn 14.
He's at turn 14, right there.
Past turn 14. My seats are 2/3 of the way down that long straight.
Oh, I know. And he'll be at the very end of that straight.
I know. We're anticipating 200 miles an hour at around where we're going to be.
At least.
At least.
Now, Frank, I know I heard some chatter earlier on. Now we're going to get into some hot F1 talk for a second. So the Bill Tunes of the world can just calm down. We'll get to the EMS stuff, but this is like a big deal here. I guess you started watching Little Drive to Survive during the pandemic, right? Like most everybody else.
Absolutely. With my son, who's 11, and is a total gearhead. Like if it has wheels, he has built it, broke it, and driven it. Well, legally.
And I heard he's got a favorite driver also.
Yeah, I see you guys, and much respect to Hamilton, but he is definitely a Lando Norris fan. So
I was trying to show he was Hamilton, or he was Lando for Halloween. Doesn't show very good.
Yeah, and he had a pretty sketchy pit crew, but we do what we can.
That's so good.
I have a lot of we love Lando, and I'm actually hoping that. Sorry, Mike. I'm hoping that we get a non-Verstappen victory just for interest and excitement. He's already
here.
He's already locked the damn thing up. And actually, over this season, I've really grown to like him because I've seen a lot of other stuff with him, and he's mostly just a nerdy guy who's like the best driver in history.
Yeah.
So he seems to be pretty. When you see him interact with other people, he actually seems to be kind of shy and all that stuff. But I would love to see Lando win his first race. That would be really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And he's for as young as he is, he's displayed like a lot of poise. I mean, he's clearly talented. I don't know if he's Verstappen talented, but he's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I don't know that many people are Verstappen talented, but in that McLaren team at the beginning of the season looked terrible, and now they look great. And Oscar Piastri's having a great season too. So, yes, Mikey V, you're showing us your McLaren Jack Daniels that you got from where?
I got it on the cruise ship, actually. I just got back from the cruise.
Of all places.
Yeah.
Well, you got a duty free then, right?
I did get a duty and tax free.
There you go.
Awesome.
And did you not enter the sexiest man alive?
No, no offense to the people that did enter that. But the people that entered that are exactly
on the cruise ship. There was a sexiest man alive contest, correct?
There was. And like I said, or I started to say was the people that entered that are exactly the ones you thought would probably enter that. So I did not. Does that sound bad?
Gotta keep a low profile on those cruises. You never know when the paparazzi are going to be around.
Yeah. I mean, one guy had a shirt made that says that he was born to win the sexiest man alive. So,
which means he knew there was a sexiest man alive contest on the cruise.
yes, somehow, maybe he's a frequent cruiser.
That's a little much.
But I had fun on the cruise. It was a good cruise. 7 days. We booked another one for next year. We're taking the kids. Yeah, it'll be fun.
Good.
Yeah. So other than that, I've been out of the loop. I don't know what's going on in the world because, I was in the Caribbean.
I mean, you were texting me like, what is sign stealing? What does that have to do?
Yeah, I was like, what's happening in Michigan? The whole world's falling apart. I have no idea. What happened? Harbaugh got fired. What's going on?
No, he didn't get fired.
I know.
Not yet.
Suspended. Oh, they're going to sign him to a big contract extension. That's what they're going to do.
Oh, gosh.
So,
Well, I mean, he could, with that resume, he could definitely leave for the Patriots. That's
That's right. It'd be good with the old inflate gate and the whole nine and
that job may be open next year too. That's what's crazy.
That's right.
That's crazy. So,
well, Ritu, would you like to introduce our guest to everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I like to play the "How long have I known you" game. It's been a very long time. But our guest today is Dr. Frank Guyette. Frank is a professor of emergency medicine at, my home EMS world at the University of Pittsburgh, and the medical director for MedEVAC, which is the flight service there, where I learned how to fly. Well, not physically fly, but be a flight physician. Frank and I met when Frank was a resident and I was a fellow. We're 7 years apart though, because that doesn't make sense. I think you might have been a resident when you first went to NAMSP.
That may have been it.
And because I often joined the Pittsburgh crew for dinner or whatever, I think it might have been more then. Because when did you start your residency?
In 01.
Yeah, I was faculty at East Carolina at that point.
Got it.
Actually getting ready to leave to go to come to Portland. So, but yeah, we met when you were young in your EMS career, and now you're like a big hot shot there.
Yeah, we have a deep bench. I'm just a utility player.
So, so where did you hail from? Where's Frank from?
So originally from New Brunswick, New Jersey, where Rutgers University is. And that's my backstory, as it were, was that my parents are Frankie and Rosie from Jersey, and my dad. This is so stereotypical. My dad is a recovering police officer, and my mom is a hairdresser. So and I got into EMS because that was in some ways the family business. My dad, our family was always in public safety. My dad was a policeman, and my granddad was a fireman.
Cool. So, and then did you go to undergrad in New Jersey too? I thought.
No. Speaking of getting back to our football conversation, I was classmates with Mike Tomlin at William and Mary.
Oh, wow. Were you really?
Yeah.
Wow. Do you just call him up and hang out now in the Berg?
I wish.
Ron doesn't get you dinner with him or anything?
No. I mean, I've been in the same room with him, but I can't say he would know who I was.
Frank.
That's my old college buddy. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, when I went to Michigan, my quarterback was a guy named Jim Harbaugh. So I was like, I went to college with Jim Harbaugh. Yeah, I've known him for 28 years. I mean, I met him once, but he's at a bar or something. But yeah, cool. And then you went to the finest medical school in the universe.
I did, Tulane, and had an amazing time there. Great place. Met a lot of really cool people, including Michelle Haydell.
Yeah.
Who was a nurse at Charity Hospital, and then went to Tulane Medical School, and then did an emergency medicine residency at the University of Pittsburgh, and then came back to be the associate program director at LSU Medicine. And when I told her that I was interested in academic EMS, she told me that there was only one place I had to go.
That's right. So Marcel and I were classmates in at med school at Tulane, and we were in the same anatomy lab together. And then we obviously went to Pitt emergency medicine residency together. And there, at that time, I mean, our class was 12, but it was really rare for people to match in the same spot, right?
Yep.
And and Abby used to call people, tell them like the day before, you would get your phone call from Abby. And I walked into the cafeteria, and back then Abby called you at your house because I didn't have a cell phone. It was 1993. And Marcel jumps up and says, "Hey, did Abby call you?" And he hadn't called me yet. And Marcel said that my face just sank.
Oh.
And then I got home that afternoon, and Abby called me and said, hopefully you'll match at Pittsburgh or whatever. And then, you go through the match and they start reading. This is funny to people nowadays, but they would hand you the envelopes, right?
Yep.
They would call you up one by one for the match and hand you an envelope. And some people would walk back to their spot and
seems like a very traditional way to do that. A little bit weird, rite of passage.
And we were
not to get a phone call the day before.
Yeah, we were in New Orleans, so I literally did a drive-through daiquiri on my way to our match meeting, and was drinking like a orange and 190 proof thing, and Marcel opened hers and says Pittsburgh, and then I'm like, because she's a Haydell and I'm a Sonny, so I'm like halfway later, and then so Marcel and I were in med school together and residency together, and then she went back to New Orleans to be on faculty there, or to work at LSU or work at Charity.
Yeah, I mean, she's an amazing lady, and definitely one of the reasons that I came to Pittsburgh, and probably played a significant role in me going into EMS.
Yeah, she's great. I'm sure she doesn't listen to us. Matter of fact, the last time I talked to her a couple years ago, she's like, "You're doing what?" No, never heard of that. But if she were to listen, big hello to Marcel.
Absolutely.
And then obviously, with you going through Pittsburgh, we have a lot of the same mentors, because a lot of the folks that were in charge then, when you were there, were in charge when I was there. And only recently have we started to see a little bit of a rollover. But obviously, that brings up Ron. And
yep.
Ron Roth was a guest that we had on last year, because he works with the NFL and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and right after the Damar Hamlin in cardiac arrest, Ron graciously came on and talked a little bit about his work with the Steelers and that sort of stuff. But when Ron was the university, or was the city of Pittsburgh medical director at that time. When I was a resident, he was the associate medical director, but he did all the work. And kind of big news on Ron's front. So fill us in on what's gone on there.
Yeah. So, after 20 years of officially being the city medical director, and probably, to your point, 30 of, being having a key role in the city, Ron has semi-retired. So he still does some shifts in our comm center, which is kind of a unique place because it's unified command. So instead of destination command for EMS, we have 92 EMS services that call in, plus commercial airlines and helicopters and other things. And the dock is just dedicated to answering all those calls. So it's affectionately called the dock in the box. So Ron still does some dock in the box shifts, which is fantastic because we get his insight and his experience. And he acts as a mentor to Dr. Lenny Weiss, who's the new city medical director. And we all of us have numbers associated with our physician, our command physician role. So the director of the city of Pittsburgh is by tradition always been MD1. And when Lenny got MD1 in August, we had to select a new number for Ron. So Ron is now MD 412, and that's the area code for Pittsburgh. For those of you that don't know that, which is pretty awesome.
I think that's great. I think that's great. That's how my Twitter handle came about. So I was MD 59 when I was a resident there.
And was it traditionally? Was it just in order?
Yeah.
So whoever was after you was 60 and 61 and so on.
Yep.
Yeah, and the residents are I think from 50 to, well, now we have 16 per class, so 50 to 90 or something like that. The fellows are in the 30s, and then the faculty are 1 through 29. But now we have so many more faculty. Most of the faculty that don't work routinely in the comm center have 3-digit numbers. So that's how Ron got the 412.
And then,
and
the mayor, was it October 10th? The mayor So it was Ron Roth Day in the city of Pittsburgh.
It was, and well deserved. I mean, Ron is Ron's been a consummate medical director. I mean, not just protocols and training and all the things that we all normally do, but advocacy and politicking, and really trying to keep the wheels on the bus, as it were.
That's just great. I mean, when I think of like Pittsburgh, like Pittsburgh EMS and people who really rep Pittsburgh, like who are in their soul Pittsburghers, Ron and Vince too, but
always.
Ron really is in always kind of that spot in my heart as representing the city of Pittsburgh as much as he does Pittsburgh EMS.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Vince was,
and like I said, Ron's not only Ron's just a standout in general. And my neighbor, because, Pittsburgh's such a small place. And so Ron's my backdoor neighbor, and my across the street neighbor is actually Abby's son, Cole, who's now like a fully functioning adult, but and was just a kid when we started. Like I said, we've had a pretty storied history when it comes to EMS, and we've had a ton of really great people. Chris Martingale, probably one of the smartest EMS physicians out there. Lenny's an amazing talent. Have many people come, chairs, division chiefs come through the door. Ted Delbridge was my fellowship director, and then
mine too.
Yeah, and then stepped down for Ron to take over. So I had, my first year was Ted, my second year was Ron, which was really cool. But we joke about the Pittsburgh Mafia just because so many people in EMS have had some connection to the city, and Ron was always the leader of the pack, as it were.
Yeah, I think at one point half of the NMSP presidents were Pittsburgh people. Yeah, between like Ted, Jane, myself, Paul Paris was one very early president. Yeah, it was kind of, there were a bunch. Yeah. It's always somebody coming through with a Pittsburgh touch in the leadership there. I think we're making Mike sick.
Yeah, no, and I think Kevin Mackey is coming through too. So like that tradition will continue to some degree. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
You look like you want to say something, Mike.
No, not at all. I'm just enjoying and watching the usual, back and forth between old friends. I just like to just sit and watch and listen.
Yeah, no, I feel bad, Mike. I didn't mean to like take Ritu down amnesia lane, but that's
it happens every time. It's okay. It's okay. And I love to hear about that, because it's so funny. There's not a lot of people that maybe have that kind of connection with people in a place, and I just think it's cool, and I love to hear about it. So that's totally good. That's what the whole front half of the show is about anyway. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty good. So I guess one of the things that I always end up asking is, what was it about EMS? I mean, you could have emergency medicine, you could have chose 1,000 different things, but you chose emergency medicine. And then from there, clearly there was, the EMS typically seems to go hand in hand with that. Not every time, but a lot of the time. So what was it about EMS? What do you love so much about it? How did it get you in?
So I told you that it's kind of like the family business. My granddad was a fireman. My dad was a policeman. So when I was 15, I heard that you could try out for like the cadets for the fire department, and it's kind of a big deal because the volunteer company in my hometown was started by my grandfather.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of felt like I had an obligation to do that. And I started going to meetings when I was 15, and I started doing some training and whatnot. But in New Jersey, you are not allowed to do any type of interior attack or fire suppression work until you're 18 years old, which means that I had 3 years to train, which meant rolling hose and washing trucks before I could actually do anything.
Yeah.
And one of my buddies was like, "Hey, I'm going over to the rescue squad because you can get certified as an EMT at 16 and they'll let you do whatever you want." So I, and I was like, "Oh, that can't be true." And on my, and I took the class when I was 15. On my 16th birthday, I sat for the test and became an EMT. And a day after that, they were like, "Hey, you're the crew chief." I was like,
"Here's the keys.
Awesome."
Yeah, have fun. Yeah.
And I had no idea what I was doing, but it was, I think that's a lot of what EMS used to be. Maybe less so today as we've gotten more mature and gotten to be more of a profession. But that was kind of my baptism in the field. And then when I went to, and I obviously was like a kind of a geeky kid and, loved science. And when I went to when I went to undergraduate, I was trying to figure out if I want to be, a scientist, like a biologist versus going to medical school. And the EMS always drew me back in, right? Like it was the taking care of patients, solving problems. Like that was always, that was a lot more fun than doing rat surgery. So that was definitely the impetus for me to go into medicine. And then at Tulane, Tulane, as Ritu might have mentioned in the past, does not have an emergency medicine department. So we did EM over at Big Charity and with LSU. And man, if you have the bug, their Big Charity is, was just such a unique place. And talk about like baptism by fire. I mean, they were they needed a lot of help. How about that? And they were willing to pretty much take anybody who would volunteer to do it. So I distinctly remember being a second year med student, and we, at the time that they didn't really integrate clinicals into that very much. So I had very little clinical experience, beyond book learning and anatomy lab and that kind of thing. And during Mardi Gras, they offered anybody who wanted to stay over to help in the emergency department. And I spent like 3 days just suturing people. It was,
oh wow.
And it was like the coolest experience of my life. I'm like, this is
Oh,
great,
yeah.
So I again, having some really incredible mentors, including Miss L Haydell from LSU, who is a Pitt alum, that really solidified my interest in EM and EMS.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I can imagine that 3 days of suturing, right, as a second year med student, you must have been like a pig in slop, right? I mean, that's
my gosh,
real medicine right there. Shit.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
And there was just it was like and it particularly, being our age, like I grew up watching ER on TV, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, this is the real deal. This is awesome.
Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah, that's so good. Well, I mean, plus the other thing is like there were, I think of times when like, I mean, obviously completely different in my paramedic internship and getting to do the things I got to do, you know, you might think, oh God, I get to do another set of sutures, but you learn so much by talking to people, putting your hand on somebody, getting like learning that bedside. Like I can imagine that was just invaluable,
Well, absolutely. And that was like I said, that was the difference between, doing rad surgery and
Yeah.
being able to relate to people and the privilege that you have to impact them at a vulnerable point in their life, right? And that is just so cool. And and really EMS, being in the street is a distillation of that is like just super pure, right? Because there's none of that institution behind you. No, nobody's there to help you, let alone have oversight. So,
Yeah.
I think it is the purest part of somebody needing help and you being there to render aid. So that was the part that I loved and still do to this day.
Yeah. Ritu, you look all relaxed there. You're like all sat back. Are you giving up on the interview or?
No, I'm just chilling. Just chilling,
All right. I'm just checking.
Halfway.
I'm just
My
checking.
drink is mostly done, so
Okay. Well, that's good.
more relaxed.
So I mean, obviously when Ritu introduced you, talked a little bit about, kind of what you're doing now, professor of emergency medicine, the, medical director for Stat MedEVAC. What's your day-to-day world like?
So it's
nowadays.
We always at Pitt, we always kind of describe what we do in emergency medicine as kind of being like a little bit of dim sum, right? Like everybody so
Pretty good.
some people are, have a heavier clinical role. I do some clinical in the ED, just to keep skills, but mostly what I do is I'm the medical director for our critical care transport network, which is it's 19 bases, 18 helicopters, and 2 ground trucks across 5 states. We service the 43 UPMC hospitals and many, many, many more that are not part of the health system. And I have a team of medical directors that works with me because that's just too big of a job for one person to do. And I also we have EM at Pitt has a couple of inpatient services as well, which is kind of unique for an emergency medicine department. We have an inpatient service that's toxicology, but I'm one of the cardiac arrest doctors. So we have an inpatient service that takes care of cardiac arrest patients. So I take care of all those folks. And then I do a little bit of research on the side. So with Jason Sperry, who's one of our trauma surgeons, he and I were able to help build something called the LIGHTS Network, the Linking Investigators in Trauma and Emergency Services. What LIGHTS does is it is essentially a clinical trials network, which spans from pre-hospital through the trauma base to in-hospital for the Department of Defense. If the DoD needs a study done, we're the people they call. And I say we, but it's really like huge team. It's now up to 40 trauma centers across the US, and just legions of paramedics, medical directors, EM docs, trauma docs, ICU docs, and we are implementing our 8th clinical trial right now. We have a couple of other studies that go on alongside those. So it's pretty busy. And it's a really great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for us to learn and really build some evidence-based medicine for EMS. That occupies most of my time. So I'm primarily a medical director that does a lot of research, and occasionally dabbled taking care of patients.
Yep, and we're going to talk a little bit about the PACT trial. But I did want to ask you about the trial that you did, the Pamper trial.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I found that to be fascinating. And I think I'm not quite sure what, I found that trial to be pretty compelling, but I'm not sure that we've acted on that, or that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Just give me a recap of the Pamper trial.
Sure. So the Pamper trial was designed to look at trauma patients who were at risk of hemorrhagic shock. So in order to qualify, you had to have a blood pressure less than 70 or a blood pressure less than 90 with a heart rate greater than 108. So like you had to be pretty darn sick, right?
Right.
And you have traumatic mechanism and you have these abnormal vital signs. So pretty likely that you're bleeding, right? And then we had helicopters. It was all helicopters in this study that were randomized to either give plasma or to give their usual care. And depending on the system, like for STAT, usual care was packed red blood cells.
Right.
But for many helicopters, many EMS services in the study, it was saline. Right.
It was still crystalloid, and it was, as Marty Schreiber said, really bad acid.
Really bad acid. Yeah, exactly. And if you scroll down to there's a Kaplan-Meier curve, there's a survival curve down there that shows like the real kind of punchline of this trial. Oh, sorry, that's it right there. If you can double click that. So survival was markedly different. There was a 10% improvement in survival if you got plasma over usual care. And that is unheard of. I mean, when we do these clinical trials, and we're talking about mortality as the outcome, dying as the outcome, we're fighting for, in the ICU, they're fighting for like a fraction of a percent, right? In the trauma bay, you know, a good intervention might be 1 or 2%. And in this case, it was a 10%,
right,
absolute reduction in mortality. And that equated to like a number needed to treat, meaning how many people you'd have to give plasma to save a life, is really, really low. It's like 4.
Wow.
So it's pretty crazy. It's a pretty crazy intervention, pretty amazing. And Ritu, you brought up a great point, right? Like why isn't everybody doing this?
Yeah.
Right? And the problem is that plasma has a really short shelf life. If you thaw it out of the blood bank, it's got a shelf life of about 4 days. And if you take it directly from a donor and you refrigerate it, that's called liquid plasma. It's good for about a month, but it's like a really rare resource. So we showed that this is a huge improvement, but it's not exactly practical, which is why people haven't adopted it. There are 2 kind of things that you could take from it, though, right? We've done some subsequent studies and we looked at people who remember I said that the usual care in that study was sometimes red blood cells and sometimes crystalloid, sometimes saline. So we had 4 groups. We had people that just got plasma. We had people that got plasma and red blood cells. We had people that got just red blood cells, and we had people that got saline. And the people that did the worst were the people that got saline, right? As you said, really bad acid, right? Delusional coagulopathy, pop the clot, hyperchloremic acidosis, all kinds of hypothermia, all kinds of bad crap that we know makes you bleed faster, right? So like the thing about saline is, you know, that's why when you look at some of the military studies, permissive hypotension was the answer, right? Because it's how little saline can I give somebody without them dying, right? That was permissive hypotension, right? But if you gave blood, they all did better. If you gave packed cells, they did pretty good. If you gave plasma, they did a little bit better than the packed cells, but not statistically different. But if they got packed cells and blood, they did really well.
Packed cells and plasma.
Exactly. And sorry, packed cells and plasma. And that's basically the cocktail for whole blood, right? Yeah. So that's why there's been such interest in whole blood. And since then, we've done a study called POWER, which was a pre-hospital safety trial, the first pre-hospital safety trial for whole blood. And we are right now about a third of the way through Tower, which is the pre-hospital trial of whole blood, air and ground, in 9 cities. Now, many other cities since then have adopted whole blood and are already using it, and I think that's reasonable because the observational evidence is pretty strong,
Right.
but we still need to do that randomized controlled trial. So in about a year or so, we'll have results on that one. And, I'm hopeful that whole blood will be an option, but whole blood is still a really limited resource, right?
Yes.
And there's only so much. So, what I'm hoping is the solution for, Billy Bob's Pretty Good EMS that isn't, Strack in San Antonio or the city of Pittsburgh or, someplace that has really, really strong resources to get whole blood is freeze-dried plasma. And that's a product that's been available in Europe for 30 years, but is not FDA approved. And there is a company in Minnesota that's been trying to get FDA approval, and they've hit some barriers, but I'm hopeful that'll turn around. And that stuff is amazing because you shoot a little bit of saline in the bag and you give it to them, and it's like giving them, a unit of plasma, and it's got a 2-year shelf life. So, that would really democratize blood products for EMS. That would, allow, even your rural services where people really need it because they're going to be far from definitive trauma care, or your under-resourced services that don't have access to, academic institutions and blood banks and everything else, the stuff that you need to do whole blood.
Yeah.
What's the gist of the freeze dried? What's the holdup? What does the FDA not like about it?
I don't really know. I mean, the what's been available in Europe is so crazy thing. We've had plasma since the 1940s, right? But we stopped using it in the 60s for 2 reasons. One was that we didn't have great ways of testing it, so a lot of people got hepatitis, got infectious diseases from it. But the other reason is that it's a lot more economical for blood banks to fractionate whole blood into the components, the platelets, the red blood cells, the plasma, and sell each of them individually. So we have to build a market for for whole blood. We have to there wasn't even really a market for plasma. I mean, it was used for some things, but no one was really using it for certainly for pre-hospital use.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the Pamper trial, for whatever reason, has stuck with me over the years, and it really and exactly when you talked about whole blood, that to me that was the next progression. Was, oh, this makes complete and total sense. But the idea that when I was training, we always talked about crystalloids probably being okay, but not the best, and always trying to find the better resuscitation fluid. And it's probably best that the stuff that comes out, that we put the stuff that looks like it or is like it back in.
Yep.
That may, I think at the end of the day, that's probably what makes the most sense.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, obviously I have a little bit of bias, but I'm really curious to see what these trials show.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people are. I think this Tower trial is really going to be a game changer in a lot of ways. It's going to answer a lot of key questions. But let's talk about PACT. So we're Portland, where I'm a medical director. I'm the medical director of. There's 2 counties in Portland, and I'm the medical director that are participating, and I'm the medical director of those counties. But the pre-hospital airway control trial, or PACT, you are the PI in that. Our friend Dr. Mo Daya is the local PI, and my 2 counties are our main participants. It is sort of, we like to call it the trauma equivalent of the PART trial.
Yep.
Which was the trial that looked at kind of airway methodology in cardiac arrest. But it's interesting that it wasn't the Lights Network that did the PART trial. I think Henry Wang was a main force. I think the PI actually on the PART trial. But yeah, talk to me a little bit about PACT and what we're trying to answer there.
Sure. So, so you're absolutely right. And Henry was part of our team that helped design the PART trial, or sorry, the PACT trial, because of his experience with PART. Henry was also a Pitt person, also one of my mentors.
That's right.
So, again, the
He's
family,
one of your
family
mentors.
runs
He was a fellow he was a research fellow at Pitt, right?
Correct. Exactly.
Right after I left. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things that the DoD had a particular interest in is that, obviously the main cause of death in combat is uncontrolled hemorrhage, but the second most common cause of death, preventable death, is loss of airway. And about 15% of trauma patients in military settings who have what are deemed to be preventable causes of death are from failure to be able to manage the airway. And this is like a crazy story, right? So, if for those of the folks who are listening who may not be super familiar with military medicine, the basic combat medic is an EMT, right? It's essentially an EMT level with a little bit of extra trauma training. And they can't do RSI. They can't do endotracheal intubation. If you are on a battlefield and you flick your laryngoscope open and put a bright light out there, you're going to get shot, right? So, like many reasons not to do it, right? So, they and because of the resources that are available to them, they often did just BLS airway management, that if somebody needed an airway, they would open the airway, maybe put an OPA or an NP airway in. And if that wasn't enough, man, you just weren't going to survive, right? In the case where your airway might be obstructed, these 18, 19-year-old kids who were EMTs basically would do Christ. And that was it. Those were their options. And then now, once you got to a forward surgical center, they would put advanced airways in. The special forces guys had a lot more training. The air medical people had a lot more training and could put advanced airways in, but there wasn't a great option for that basic combat medics. And they tried the King back in, I guess, like the late 90s, early 2000s, and had some trouble with it, and it was really unclear why. Maybe some training issues and such. But the special forces guys, so they had a very anti-SGA bent for a little while, and the special forces guys, however, adopted the iGel, around 2010 or so, 2012, somewhere in that neighborhood, and got to really like it. And they thought that this was a really good tool for their environment. But there was no evidence to support, supraglottics versus endotracheal tubes. So naturally, the DoD had this question, like, what is we have to invest money in training folks who may only do a few airways in their career, or they may do a whole lot all in a very short period of time. And how do you train them? What devices do you give them? What tools do you give them? How do you keep them? How do you keep competency? And these are, and while these are certainly military problems, this is not unique to military EMS, right? I mean, Mike, you're a training guy, right? I mean, this is like something I think every EMS agency struggles with. And ETI is hard, right? And keeping people competent at ETI is really hard. Are there better options? So we designed this trial to look at not the airway device itself, because that doesn't really, when you think about it, that doesn't really matter, right? What matters is the strategy, right? Is the strategy that I'm going to go in with an ETI or I'm going to go in with a supraglottic. And what supraglottic I use doesn't matter, right? Or it may not, we don't know. Endotracheal, like these days, yep, you're still people doing straight DL. There are people doing video laryngoscopy. There are people using bougies. There's all kinds
Mhm.
of different ways that people
Mhm.
do it, right? And so we had to come up with a study design that was pragmatic, meaning that we didn't dictate to the EMS service what they did, but would allow us to compare those strategies, right? So we ended up doing this really unique thing called a step wedge. And the step wedge design is really something that's limited to, had been previously limited to like educational interventions, right? And you randomize, but you, instead of randomizing like at the level of the patient where you're like, okay, today is, you know, if on this patient you're going to put an endotracheal tube, on the next patient you're going to put a supraglottic, or at the level of the medic, or even at the level of the truck, we randomize by time. So from, you know, January to June, you're going to do endotracheal tubes, and then starting in June to the next January, you're going to do supraglottic. And that's kind of the way a step wedge works. And the EMS agencies in this study, which there are 28 total, I think, across 9 sites, they were grouped, and there are 7 steps. So at 7 different times, the agency switched from a strategy of endotracheal first to a strategy of supraglottic first. And as with anything else, like you want to make it safe for patients. So regardless of what strategy you were in, if the first attempt failed, you could rescue with whatever you want.
Right. Yeah. And in the whole, and the endpoint is, was it 40? Is it 48 hour, 72-hour survival? Correct.
Yeah, it's 20. So you, it's
24.
that's close. It's 24-hour survival, and PACT, or sorry, PART was 72-hour survival, which
Part
is
was 72.
That's where
yeah.
I'm
it's a little
getting.
bit,
Okay.
right. And that's a little bit different, because that was, remember, in cardiac arrest, you need 72 hours really to kind of get a feel for what the person's neurologic recovery is going to be like. But in trauma, you know, we can generally get to that answer a lot quicker.
And then this, of course, we haven't talked a lot about this in the past, but this is an EFIC trial, and I think Mike has that up on the picture there. But the EFIC stands for Exception from Informed Consent. We have a lot of experience with EFIC trials in the Portland area. We may be one of the most experienced sites in the country in doing EFIC trials. They actually were doing EFIC trials even before I got here in 2002, as they were one of the sites for the public access defibrillation trial, which was in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. But you know, an exception from informed consent trial carries with it a lot of interesting components. And when I talk to our paramedics about it, what I say is, you have a patient in front of you, and we have 2 interventions that we think both work, but we don't really know which one is better, right? And it seems to me that in the long term, we should try to figure out if one is a lot better than the other. But I can't look at this patient and say, well, hello, sir, I know you've had 2 beers only tonight, and your GCS is 7, but let's talk through the risks and benefits of this trial that we would like to enroll you in. And could you just lift up your hand and sign right here? You know, that's not feasible or possible. And those of us who've taken our EMS boards and taken EMS fellowship learn about the development of the exception from informed consent process. But the idea that you're in an environment where informed consent is not feasible, and that the intervention that you're studying has really high stakes, the idea is that you can go through a community consultation and notification process and proceed to do that study to determine which one of these interventions is better. And so that's, I think this has been an interesting kind of approach to that. And, you know, your take, Frank, on kind of the EFIC challenges, and we'll talk a little bit about data safety monitoring boards in a minute, but kind of your take on doing an exception trial.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, unfortunately, you're absolutely right. There are lots of patients. It started, like you said, with the PAD trial, right? And it started with cardiac arrest, because clearly somebody who's being resuscitated from cardiac arrest is not going to be able to give you informed consent. And the FDA, who controls, how you get one of these EFIC waivers, or EFIC approvals, has rules for these, and the rules were set by the federal government, and the rules are that you have to have a condition that is life or limb threatening, right? So, like you said, it's got to be high stakes, right? It has to be a narrow therapeutic window, which means whatever intervention you're doing has to be done in a very, very short period of time, a time that is usually so short that it precludes like finding a family member or some other legally authorized representative to get consent from, right? And putting an airway in for a trauma, or giving blood for a trauma. These are perfect examples of what would be an EFIC type study. And the other thing that you said, Ritu, which is really important, is that both interventions have to have the potential for benefit, right?
Yep.
So in the case of the PACT trial, right, we know that endotracheal intubation, and there's been many, many observational studies on this in the past for pre-hospital intubation in trauma patients, does have some benefit for the right patient, right? And supraglottics there's observational data to suggest that they're beneficial, and there is a thought that there's a lower burden of training, that they're faster to go in, so the patient may be less likely to be exposed to hypoxia, hypotension, all the complications that we have with intubation, right? And so again, maybe not for everybody, but certainly, from the data that we have from both Airways 2 and from the PART trial, we know in the cardiac arrest patient there is a benefit to supraglottic. So these are some of the arguments that we made to FDA to say, look, this is a big deal. We're gonna do a study on folks, and we're gonna take away to some degree their autonomy. Like, they don't have the opportunity to give informed consent because of the circumstance that they're in. But and Ritu, you said something earlier that was really cool, and I think really important, is that if we don't study it, if we don't do it in a systematic way, then what we do is we doom hundreds, maybe thousands of other people to get an intervention that might not be the best,
right?
Because we just don't know any better.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, and I think there's another part to it that I think our friend Dr. Terry Schmidt looked at, I think around that same time frame in the 90s, was sort of EMS providers' attitudes towards doing these, exception from informed consent. Like the medics themselves may have like this, I don't want to say issue, but maybe issue, just to make it easier to understand. Like, maybe they feel like we shouldn't be doing that to people. So how do you manage that? Because I think that's probably even more magnified nowadays,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And definitely controversial. And I think part of it is, one, transparency, right? Like making sure that we're very clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And two, kind of explaining that, we all have like our biases, right? Like, some people are, sticking with the airway metaphor, right? Like, some people are old school, and I can DL anybody, and I'm really good at this, and I can do a jackknifed upside down in a car and in the rain, right? And then you have other folks, most medics, like, and this goes back to, Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, the average medic does 1.5 intubations a year, right? And they're just not going to be, and most of them are not going to be super skilled at that unless they're, doing a lot of cadaver practice, or they're going to the OR, or they're doing something else to maintain that skill. So, maybe the supraglottic is a better option. And there may be like a little bit of a generational gap there too, because I think a lot of our younger clinicians are way more comfortable with a supraglottic than they are with an endotracheal tube. But definitely a big difference there. I also think the other piece that is important in terms of the buy-in is them understanding the community consultation part of this, in that we're not consenting the community, right?
Right.
Like we can't go to Portland and consent 4 million people in Western Oregon, right? But what we can do is we, typically when we, in an individual study, we reach out to about 20,000 people. So it's kind of like the Nielsen ratings, like for TV, you get like a big swath of people, and you really target like a subset of people, and you try to make sure that, you're getting accurate demographics, be it ethnicity, racial, gender, whatever it might be, that you're trying to get the right mix of people. And you get feedback from them, and you're like, this is why we're doing this. Are you comfortable with this? If you're not, why? And then we sometimes adapt the study to deal with that too, right? And with the blood product ones, for instance, too, there are going to be populations of people who are going to be much more apprehensive about that. Like, so let's take, say, Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Who would be against getting blood transfusions. Well, we reach out to them directly, to those communities, and we offer them opt-out bracelets, so that if they want to be excluded from the study, that we'll try to respect that. Like we do. It's not perfect, right? It's clearly not, right? There's nothing that's as good as getting, true informed consent from the individual. But under the circumstances, we really do try to do the best we can, and try to keep everybody feeling above board. The other thing that we do that's kind of unique in lights, and we made this argument to the FDA specifically, is that it's not the paramedic enrolling the patient. The paramedic is, the analogy we made to them is, if you were testing a new cancer drug, right? It's the doctor who's enrolling the patient, who's writing the order for the drug, and the nurse, like, who's on the oncology unit, is, they're administering the drug, right? But they're not the one who made the decision, right? Certainly they have input into the process, that they have to be a stakeholder in the process, but Ritu is on the hook for enrolling these folks in Oregon because he's the medical director. He wrote the order.
Yeah. Good point. Because the challenge was, like, always, the paramedics have to do all this stuff, whether it's informed consent or notification, and kind of got around that. So that's good.
Right. And we do all the notification. And one of the other pieces of EFIC is that you have to continued consent. So if the patient regains the capacity for informed refusal, we ask them, and I'm not asking them, hey, remember when you were intubated? Can I have permission to do that? Right. That's kind of goofy, right? What I'm asking him for is continued participation, right? Can I look at your medical records? Can I ask you questions? Can I check your lab values, right? To make sure that that the results of what we did are recorded accurately, and that we're getting the information that we need to make the right decision. Yeah.
And then, so that brings up sort of the last kind of topic, as we're kind of running up on an hour here, but this trial got stopped.
Yeah.
Probably it's been 3-4 months now.
Since
we stopped it. So we got it as a local investigator, we got notified, hey, you need to stop enrolling people as of, like, right now. And, and for me as a medical director, there's a lot of rumors that start to fly, and you have to sort of kind of tamp those down. And, to me, it was a great example, though, of the process working the way it's supposed to, and how in these trials, which are, again, high stakes, these are high stakes decisions that we're making, where we have two standards of care that we don't know which one is better. That it's the design is to try to maximize safety. And that's through the creation of the sort of the safety monitoring board. So how does that work?
So there's a data safety monitoring board, which is independent from the investigative team. So doesn't involve, me or Jason Sperry from trauma, or you, Ritu, as one of the EMS medical directors, or Mo Daya as one of our site PIs. independent experts, right? So our data safety monitoring board was EM physicians, statisticians, trauma surgeons from around the country who had nothing to do with the study. And their job was that at 2 intervals, at about a third of enrollment, 2/3 of enrollment, they got a look at our data and they can ask us questions. And
So let me stop you there, because this is an interesting. Couple of our medics ask me. So if you're doing a study with high stakes, don't you want to check how it's going along the way?
yeah, so
Why wouldn't you want to do that?
well, because I can't, because then I would
why
be
not?
biased. So if I had looked at the data and I knew how people were allocated, like if I knew survival for the supraglottics versus survival of the ETI, that I could, even unconsciously, I could steer people to be doing one thing or the other, right? So the investigators are not allowed to know
Right.
the allocations until the end of the study. That's part of the blinding process. Now, what happened in this case is that the DSMB get an unblinded version, so they get to see it.
Yeah.
But you have to
under the hood.
remember, yeah, exactly. They get to peer under the hood. But you have to remember that when they do this, they don't always have the context. And step wedge is a very different study design than most people are used to, right? So because we're randomizing by time, most of the people who were in the study at the time of the interim analysis were in the pre-intervention. They were in the standard care group, right? And I don't know, because I'm not allowed to see what the DSMB saw, but I can guess, right? And if you were going to guess, right, if you were going to look at people who were using a strategy of endotracheal intubation or a strategy of supraglottic before it got randomized, so their usual care, who do you put the supraglottics in?
Worst people.
The people
worst
who are all monked up.
Right. So if you looked at that data and you compared supraglottic versus endotracheal tube, you'd be like, holy shit, we are doing some bad stuff here, right? So, was I not supposed to say that, Ritu?
No, you can.
Really fucking say whatever the fuck you want. So.
Okay. So again, I don't know for a fact that that's what they saw, but I think that's what it was. And they did the right, as you absolutely, the system worked exactly the way it's supposed to be, right? Our goal is, our goal is to answer these questions, but with the caveat that we have to do it in a way that respects patient safety, right? So they said stop, and we did, right? And then once we were stopped, then they said, okay, let's look at the data. Analyze it this way, analyze it that way. And our data coordination center at DCC, which is run by Steve Wisniewski, who's a world-class public health guy, an epidemiologist, and a trialist, designs some studies for a living. He really cracked the data, and he showed them the data as we would present it at the end of the trial. And when they saw that, they said, oh wait, it's okay, you can start up again, right? The problem is that when you stop an EFIC study, right, you have to go back to the FDA and get their approval to start it, right? So DSMB said, you're good, but then we had to go to FDA and go through that process again. And because the Department of Defense funded it, the Department of Defense has their own IRB called a HARPO, a Human Research Protection Office, which is good. Again, right, this is high stakes.
Yep.
You want all the brains making sure you're doing the right thing. So after FDA said it was okay, we went back to HRPO, to DOD, and DOD said, yep, you're good to go. And then we had to go to Pitt's IRB finally, because in these big multi-center trials, something else that's new is something called a single IRB, where all the IRBs of all the institutions, Oregon, Houston, whatever, they all submit to one IRB to kind of be the lead. So Pitt had to make the final decision after looking at what the DSMB said, after looking at what the FDA said, after looking at what the DOD said, and they had to make the final decision. And a few weeks ago, they said, continue, finish the study. And we've been up and enrolling again for a couple of weeks, and we've enrolled 11 people in the last 14 days.
2 of which were enrolled right here.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
So
we're at we have to enroll 2,009 patients total to meet our goal so that we can do all the proper statistical analyses. And we're, in addition to looking at mortality, which is our primary outcome, we're looking at all those questions that you're probably asking. Does it matter what's supraglottic? Does it matter how you do endotracheal? Does it matter if you use RSI? Right? All those things. And we need to get to 2009. We are now at 1,311, thanks to Ritu and many, many other people. But that's where we're at.
good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, so I was obviously super involved in PACT. Jesus criminy. Anyway, when PACT started, I've been out of the loop for just about a year and a little bit of time. So how long were you on hold for?
For 4 months.
Oh my Lord, gosh dang.
Yeah. Which, that's just a killer in momentum, right? And then trying to get, and you know what it'd be like to get your guys to, buy into the study again. And particularly with the rumors that, my God, did something bad happen, right? So we really, we've been trying hard to be transparent, to communicate well. And, hope, you guys are helping me do that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we really pounded. So in our region, we do these we call multi-agency trainings, where we bring all of our agencies in together to train together, because we take care of things like trauma and cardiac arrest with more than one agency on the scene, and we want them to train on those high criticality patients as a team. And so we really, part of multi-agency training is medical directors roundtable, and during the medical directors portion, we really hit hard on PACT and specifically talked about what are the safety guardrails in a study, and why did this work the way we would want it to work? Once people understood that, I think they felt much more reassured that this all totally makes sense, and that we wouldn't restart a study that we knew was bad or anything like that. And there was no malfeasance going on or anything. It was just a pretty, that it seemed like to be a pretty straightforward analysis. And then a deeper analysis showed we needed more data. And then I also pointed out to them, I said, you all can guess what happened, but we don't really know, because we're not allowed to know. I mean, we're smart people. We can guess, or at least, but it would bias us to know what really raised their concern. Might have been futility. Might have been So
right.
So who knows? But I think it was very helpful to do that. So to kind of go over that, and I think hopefully this will be helpful for other medics who are participating in the study to kind of understand how the safety monitoring board, the DSMB process, works.
Yeah. And I'm, and like I said, these things are huge efforts with lots and lots of people. And, Mike, you brought up the point, how do we make people comfortable with these, with these research processes? And, I know, man, everybody's struggling, right? Everybody's, we don't have enough clinicians. Budgets are tight, all the other things that you have to worry about just to deliver care. And this seems like an extra burden, right? But, the thing that I want to impart, particularly to our pre-hospital colleagues, is that we're going to change practice, right? This is super important. This, just like the blood stuff, right? We want to be progressive. We want to be evidence-based. We want to deliver the best care to our patients. Well, we can't do that unless we answer these questions.
Yeah, I agree. And, I point out so we were a rock site, and whenever we look at ACLS guidelines, the rock drove a lot of what the current guidelines are now, right? And so I point out to our crew, you not only, so one, data shows that if you're performing research, you seem to have better outcomes. there's some data that shows that you're a higher performing EMS system if you're doing research in your system. So that's one. So we have people in our own system who are alive today because we do research, because we are a system that is organized, competent, and clinically adept enough to do these things. But two, there are a lot of people in the entire world who benefited from this work. And so as an EMS system, our job is to save lives. But how cool is it that we not only saved lives in our own community, we've actually saved lives all over the world because we've participated in this research that led to development of guidelines and improving the quality of care and the standard of care. And once you kind of, I think, couch it in the mission of overall in what our mission is as public safety, I think people understand that. And then I also think that, one of my friends and one of my mentors, Ron Perillo, talks about how you need to embed research into the fabric and mission of your EMS system for all the reasons we just talked about. And so I today met with union leadership, and we talked about research and how important it is and how union support is really helpful for us in that. And they, they were like, well, we like doing it. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep. Cool. Well, Mike, you want to take a wrap on this, or what do you think? Hey.
Yeah, well, I'm good. I can totally get us out of here.
Yeah. We can talk about football some more, but really the vroom vrooms are coming. The vroom vrooms are coming.
Mm.
Yeah. There's a lot of football stuff going on for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we're getting down to it.
That is true.
Like, we're really getting down to it. Yeah. But anyway, I have to go make my award-winning chili for my cook-off tomorrow.
Oh, that's right. You won.
Oh, nice.
After we get down here. Yeah. You want to know what I'm making?
No. Yeah. Tell me.
I am making a Nashville hot pork belly chili.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh, I'm jealous.
Yeah. I smoked the pork belly on the Traeger earlier today. Put the Nashville seasoning on it, and then I'm going to go let it cook all night. It should be really good.
Nice.
Mike, next time I come to Austin, I know where I'm going.
Yeah, exactly. It should be good.
We'll all be there together in a couple months.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I'll get us out of here. On behalf of Dr. Ritu Sani, Dr. Frank Guyette, Mike Verkest, you've been watching and listening to the EMS show. Thanks for listening, episode 25, and we will catch you on the next one. You guys all have a great night. We'll see you later.
Good night.
Hey, thanks for listening to the EMS show. Let's continue this conversation. What do you say? Check out the official Facebook page and Twitter feed. The EMS show is a Firedog production.